The mining colony of Kepler 442b had been dead for 3 years when the salvage team found him. Captain Voss led his crew through the ruins of what used to be a busy human settlement. Their boots crunched on crystallized dirt as they searched for anything valuable in the wreckage. "Another dead world," muttered Kang Min, one of the salvage workers. He kicked at a piece of broken machinery. Whatever hit this place turned everything to crystal. "Even the air feels wrong here." Voss nodded grimly. 3,000 people had lived on this mining planet. Now there was nothing but glittering remains and twisted metal. The atmospheric processors had failed completely. The buildings had collapsed. Every living thing should have died within hours. That was why finding the boy was impossible. Dae-hyun lay curled up in a small space beneath what used to be the residential block. Chunks of concrete and steel beams had fallen around him, creating a tiny shelter. He looked like he was sleeping peacefully. "Boss, you need to see this," called out Soo-jin, the team's scanner operator. Her voice was shaking. "I'm getting readings that don't make sense." Voss hurried over and looked at her equipment. The energy readings were jumping wildly. The scanner kept beeping in confusion as it tried to process what it was detecting. "This can't be right," Voss said. "According to this, there's more energy coming from that kid than from our ship's reactor." The boys stirred as their voices got louder. Slowly, he opened his eyes and looked up at them. His eyes were an unusual golden color that seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. "Who are you?" Dae-hyun asked softly. His voice carried an odd echo that made everyone stop and listen. "We're salvage crew from the ship Wanderer's Prize," Voss explained carefully. "What's your name, son? How long have you been here?" Dae-hyun sat up and brushed dust from his clothes. Despite being trapped for 3 years, he looked healthy and clean. His black hair fell across his forehead as he looked around at the destruction. "I'm Dae-hyun. I lived here with my family." He paused and looked confused. "But everyone else is gone now." "I've been alone for a long time," Kang Min whispered to Soo-jin. "Kid looks like he's been here for maybe a day, not 3 years. How is he even alive?" The scanner in Soo-jin's hand started beeping faster. She looked at the readings and her face went pale. "The energy signatures are getting stronger. Whatever this kid is, he's not completely human." Voss helped Dae-hyun to his feet. The moment he touched the boy, he felt a strange tingling sensation run up his arm. It was like touching a live electrical wire, but warm instead of painful. "We need to get you to our ship," Voss said. "Our doctor will want to check you over." As they walked through the ruins toward their shuttle, none of them noticed the way the crystallized ground seemed to pulse with soft light wherever Dae-hyun stepped. Far across the galaxy, in a place where space itself bent around massive structures of living crystal, ancient beings felt the disturbance. Elder Taemin had been sleeping for centuries when the sensation woke him. His enormous form, which existed partly in normal space and partly in dimensions that humans couldn't see, stirred with sudden interest. "Brothers?" His voice echoed through the crystalline halls of Draconis Prime. "Sisters, wake. The blood calls to us after 10,000 years of silence." One by one, the other Draconic elders emerged from their long meditation. Elder Sora's scales shimmered like captured starlight as she took her place in the ancient council chamber. Elder Hyunwoo, youngest of their kind at only 3,000 years old, manifested as swirling patterns of energy and light. "Are you certain?" Sora asked, her voice like the sound of solar winds. The bloodline was scattered so long ago, hidden so deeply that even we lost track of it. Taemin gestured toward the viewing crystals that lined their chamber. Images began to form in the living stone, showing distant star systems and the energy patterns that flowed between them. "Feel for yourself," he said. "A human child surviving what should have killed all life. Energy readings that match the old records. The signs are unmistakable." The elders gathered around the viewing crystals, their massive consciousnesses reaching out across space to touch the edges of what they were sensing. What they found made them exchange looks of wonder and disbelief. "The Stellar Dynasty," Hyunwoo whispered. "The royal bloodline that ruled 3 galaxies before the Great Exile. We thought it was lost forever." Sora consulted ancient texts that were carved into the walls of their chamber. The symbols glowed as she read them, activated by her touch. "The prophecies speak of a time when the scattered blood would awaken," she said, "when the galaxy would face its greatest threat and need its true protectors to return." Taemin rose from his resting place, his form growing larger as excitement filled him. If this child truly carries the royal blood, then everything changes. The humans were more than just another young species. They were our partners, our equals, the bridge between all forms of life. The viewing crystal showed more details now. The salvage ship carrying Daehyun was heading toward the nearest space station. Soon others would begin to notice the strange readings that surrounded the boy. "We must move quickly," Sora declared. "If the blood has awakened, then the ancient enemies will sense it too. They will try to destroy the heir before he can claim his heritage." Hyunwoo's energy patterns pulsed with urgency. "The seeker ships have been dormant for millennia. How long will it take to prepare them?" "Too long," Taemin admitted. "But we have no choice. Signal the other elders across the galaxy. Tell them the bloodline has returned. The heir must be protected until we can reach him." Meanwhile, aboard the Wanderer's prize, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was running every test she could think of on their unusual passenger. Each scan revealed new impossibilities that challenged everything she thought she knew about human biology. "Captain," she called over the ship's communication system, "you need to see these readings." Voss arrived in the medical bay to find her staring at holographic displays that showed Daehyun's cellular structure in detail. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A human being whose DNA has extra sequences that don't match anything in our databases," she explained. "His cells are generating energy at rates that should be impossible. And his brain activity." She shook her head in amazement. "It's like he's thinking on 17 different levels at once." Daehyun sat quietly on the examination table, looking out the small viewport at the stars. Something about the sight of space filled him with a longing he couldn't explain. In his mind, he heard whispers in languages that seemed familiar but impossible. "Doctor," he said suddenly, "in my dreams I see cities floating in space. Ships bigger than planets, people who look like me but also like—" He struggled to find words. "Like everything else at the same time." Rodriguez exchanged a worried look with Captain Voss. "What kind of dreams?" "Old dreams," Daehyun replied. "Dreams that feel like memories. Like I've been asleep for a very long time and I'm just starting to wake up." The ship's sensors suddenly started registering massive energy signatures approaching from deep space. Captain Voss ran to the bridge to find his crew staring at readings that made no sense. "Sir," called out Navigation Officer Park, "we've got multiple contacts incoming. But these ships—" He paused, checking his instruments again. "They're bigger than anything in our databases, and they're heading straight for us." Through the viewports, they could see lights approaching in the distance. As the objects came closer, their true size became apparent. The lead ship was over 1 kilometer long, its hull seeming to bend light around it in impossible ways. A voice suddenly spoke directly into the minds of everyone aboard the Wanderer's prize. It bypassed their communication systems entirely. Reaching them through means they couldn't understand. "We seek the one called Daehyun. Return him to us and know that you serve the oldest law in the galaxy. Refuse and face consequences beyond your understanding." In the medical bay, Daehyun stood up slowly. His golden eyes now glowed with an inner fire that made the air around him shimmer with heat. "They've come for me," he said quietly. "Just like in my dreams." Captain Voss's voice came over the ship's intercom, tight with stress. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Voss of the salvage ship Wanderer's Prize. The boy is under our protection. State your intentions." The response came immediately, still speaking directly into their minds. "We are the Draconic Elders, guardians of the bloodline. The heir returns to us now as was always destined. Do not interfere with forces beyond your comprehension." Daehyun walked to the viewport and pressed his hand against the metal. Where he touched, the ship's hull began to resonate with strange harmonics. "It's okay," he told Dr. Rodriguez, who was backing away in fear. "I know who they are now. I remember." As the massive Draconic ship surrounded the small salvage vessel, Daehyun felt something awakening deep inside him. Memories that weren't his own. Knowledge of things that had happened before he was born. Power that had been sleeping in his blood for generations. The lost human boy from the dead mining colony was about to discover that he was the heir to the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. The docking bay of the Draconic flagship was larger than most human cities. As Daehyun stepped off the small transport shuttle, he felt the vast space around him pulse with energy that made his skin tingle. The walls curved away in directions that hurt his eyes to follow, as if the ship existed in more dimensions than normal space allowed. Captain Voss had wanted to come with him, but the Draconic Elders had been clear. Only Daehyun would be allowed aboard their ship. The salvage crew could only watch as their passenger was taken by beings older than human civilization. Elder Taemin appeared before Daehyun as a figure of controlled starlight. His true form was too large for the physical world, so he showed himself as something the human boy could understand without his mind breaking. "Welcome home, young prince," Taemin said. His voice echoed strangely as if it came from very far away and very close at the same time. Daehyun looked up at the towering figure without fear. "I've been dreaming about this place. About you. But I don't understand what's happening to me. You are the last heir of the stellar dynasty." Elder Sora materialized beside Taemin. Her form shimmered like captured moonlight. "The bloodline we have protected for 10,000 years. They walked through corridors that changed around them as they moved. The ship seemed to respond to their presence, walls shifting to accommodate their path." Daehyun noticed that wherever he stepped, the floor glowed softly for a moment before fading back to normal. 10,000 years, Daehyun repeated. "But humans only reached space a few hundred years ago." Elder Hyunwoo laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "That is what your people believe now. But it was not always so. Once humans ruled not just Earth, but 3 entire galaxies. They entered a vast chamber filled with floating crystals that glowed with inner light. Each crystal contained something that looked like moving pictures, but the images seemed to flow directly into Daehyun's mind instead of just his eyes. "The Hall of Memory," Sora explained. "Here we keep the true history of your people." Daehyun gasped as the first images hit his consciousness. He saw Earth as it had been long ago. Not the blue and green world he knew from pictures, but a planet covered with floating cities that reached into space itself. Massive structures orbited the planet, connected by bridges of light that stretched across impossible distances. "This was Earth during the height of the stellar dynasty," Taemin said. "Your ancestors built an empire that spanned 3 galaxies, not through war and conquest, but through something much more powerful." The images shifted to show humans working alongside creatures Daehyun had never imagined. Beings made of living crystal, entities of pure energy, creatures that seemed to be built from the stuff of stars themselves. All of them worked together in perfect harmony. "Synthesis," Sora continued. "The royal bloodline possessed a unique gift. They could adapt their biology to work with any form of life, no matter how alien. They became living bridges between species that should never have been able to communicate." Daehyun watched in amazement as he saw his ancestors literally changing their physical forms to match the beings around them. A human diplomat grew crystal formations on her skin to communicate with rock-based aliens. A human scientist developed the ability to process electromagnetic radiation directly, allowing him to speak with energy beings. "We were your guardians and partners," Hyunwoo added. "When humanity reached out to the stars, we were there to help them grow. The royal bloodline made it possible for thousands of different species to live and work together. But then the images changed, showing something that made Daehyun's blood run cold. Darkness swept across the galaxy. Not the normal darkness of space, but something actively malevolent that consumed everything it touched. Where it passed, stars simply stopped existing, leaving behind emptiness that hurt to look at." "The Devourers," Taemin said grimly, "entities from the void between galaxies. They consume not just matter and energy, but possibility itself. Everything they touch becomes not just dead, but impossible to have ever been alive." Daehyun watched in horror as the great human cities fell before the advancing darkness. But instead of fighting back with weapons and armies, he saw something that surprised him. "Your ancestors made the ultimate sacrifice," Sora explained. "Rather than risk the Devourers spreading to other galaxies, the stellar dynasty chose exile." The memory crystals showed human scientists working frantically on some kind of massive project. They were changing their own DNA, deliberately removing the abilities that made them special. They scattered their bloodline across the galaxy. Hyunwoo continued. They used advanced genetics to lock away their powers and hide among primitive human populations on isolated worlds. The plan was to wait until the Devourers moved on, then slowly reawaken the bloodlines and rebuild. Daehyun felt tears running down his face as he watched his ancestors give up everything they had built to protect the galaxy. "Did it work?" "Yes and no," Taemin admitted. "The Devourers moved on to other galaxies, thinking this one was too primitive to bother with. But the genetic locks worked too well. Instead of being temporary, they became permanent. The royal bloodline was scattered and diluted until only tiny traces remained. For 10,000 years we have watched and waited," Sora added. "We found hints of the bloodline in exceptional humans. people who showed unusual abilities or survival traits. But never the pure strain, never the true heir. Until now, Hyunwoo said, looking directly at Daehyun, until you survived something that should have killed every living thing on your world. Daehyun remembered the disaster that had destroyed his colony. The atmospheric processors had failed, releasing toxins that turned everything to crystal. Everyone had died within hours. Everyone except him. I felt it happening, he said slowly. When the poisoned air started spreading, something inside me changed. I could taste the toxins, but instead of killing me, my body started breaking them down, creating new compounds that made the air safe to breathe. The bloodline awakening, Taemin confirmed. Your heritage responding to mortal danger by activating abilities that have slept for millennia. As they spoke, Daehyun felt something changing inside him. The knowledge flowing from the memory crystals was awakening parts of his mind that had been dormant. He could suddenly sense the life force of every being on the ship, feel the flow of energies that powered their incredible technology. There's something else, he said suddenly. Something wrong. I can feel it at the edge of space. The elders exchanged worried looks. Your senses are already adapting, Sora said. What do you feel? Daehyun closed his eyes and reached out with his enhanced perception. What he found made him stagger with shock. They're coming back, he whispered. The Devourers. They've finished destroying the other galaxies and now they're returning here. Elder Taemin's form blazed brighter with alarm. How long? Soon, Daehyun replied, his voice carrying new authority. Maybe months. Maybe weeks. But they're definitely coming, and this time they won't be fooled by primitive appearances. Then there is no time to waste, Hyunwoo declared. The awakening must be accelerated. Wait, Daehyun said. There's something else. The Devourers aren't just wandering randomly. Something is guiding them. Something that remembers this galaxy and wants to finish what was started 10,000 years ago. The implication sent waves of concern through the Draconic elders. If the Devourers were being deliberately directed back to their galaxy, it meant their return was not random chance but a planned assault. No matter, Sora declared, her form pulsing with renewed determination. We have what we lacked before. We have the heir. The bloodline has returned, and with it, the power to unite the galaxy's scattered civilizations. Taemin nodded gravely. Signal the other elder councils across the galaxy. Tell them the prophecy of return has begun. The heir has awakened and the final war approaches. As alarms began sounding throughout the massive ship, Daehyun felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. The lost boy from the mining colony was gone, replaced by something that was only beginning to understand its true nature. What happens now? He asked. Now, Elder Taemin replied. You learn to become what you were always meant to be, the bridge between all forms of life, the heir to an empire that never truly fell. The one who will unite the galaxy against the darkness that seeks to devour everything we hold dear. Daehyun nodded, feeling power stirring in his blood that had waited 10,000 years to awaken. The Devourers were coming, but this time the galaxy would not face them divided and unprepared. This time, they would have their prince. The Nexus Station floated in neutral space between galaxies, a massive structure built by civilizations so old that their names had been forgotten. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Great Assembly Hall was being prepared for use. Ancient beings who had hidden themselves across the galaxy were answering the call. Daehyun stood in the center of the enormous chamber, feeling very small despite the power growing inside him. Around him, representatives of the galaxy's oldest civilizations took their places in seats designed for forms of life he could barely understand. Elder Jinwoo materialized beside the other Draconic. Representatives as beings that defied description filled the hall. The crystalline minds from the Arcturus system appeared as towers of living diamond that sang in mathematical harmonies. The void dancers from beyond the galactic rim existed as empty spaces that somehow had personality and intelligence. Friends, Daehyun began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I know this gathering is unusual. Many of you haven't spoken to each other for thousands of years. But we face a threat that requires all of us to work together. The energy shapers, beings of pure light who had given up physical form millions of years ago, pulsed with interest. Their representatives spoke in colors that painted words directly into the minds of everyone present. Young heir, we remember your bloodline. The ancient treaties speak of cooperation. but also of proof. What evidence do you offer that you can succeed where your ancestors could not? Daehyun had been expecting this question. Instead of answering with words, he reached out with his enhanced senses and gently touched the consciousness of every being in the assembly. The contact was light, respectful, like offering a handshake rather than demanding submission. The response was immediate. Ancient minds that had never been able to truly communicate suddenly found themselves connected through Daehyun's unique nature. The energy shapers could feel the thoughts of the crystalline minds. The void dancers could sense the emotions of beings made of solid matter. This is what the royal bloodline offers, Daehyun said as he maintained the connection. Not dominance, but unity. Not conquest, but cooperation. The machine collective, vast computer intelligences that had been calculating for eons, processed this demonstration through billions of logical circuits. Their response came as precise mathematical equations that somehow conveyed surprise and approval. Calculation complete. Previous isolation protocols were based on incompatible consciousness structures. Royal bloodline integration allows for 847% increase in cooperative efficiency, but not everyone in the assembly was convinced. The deep dwellers, ancient beings who lived in the cores of planets, rumbled their concerns through gravitational waves that shook the station. The young one offers pretty promises, but the enemy approaches with certainty. Our ancestors tried cooperation before. They failed and chose exile over extinction. Because they didn't have enough time, Daehyun replied, his enhanced perception allowing him to understand the gravitational speech of the deep dwellers. The Devourers caught the last empire by surprise. This time we know they're coming. This time we can prepare. The hall's main display activated, showing tactical information that made several representatives recoil in horror. The approaching Devourer fleet was massive beyond comprehension, their ships leaving trails of emptiness wherever they passed. The enemy has grown stronger during their journey through other galaxies, Elder Sora reported from her position among the Draconic delegation. They have consumed civilizations we never imagined, absorbed technologies and abilities from entire galactic clusters. Young Junho, who had been rescued from the same mining colony as Daehyun, stood to address the assembly. His presence as Daehyun's closest friend from before the awakening carried special weight. I've known Daehyun since we were kids, he said, his simple human words somehow carrying more impact than the cosmic speeches of ancient beings. When our mining equipment broke down and people started dying, he didn't try to save himself first. He figured out how to fix things for everyone. That's who he is. The Time Weavers, beings who existed across multiple moments simultaneously, shimmered as they shared visions of possible futures. Their representatives spoke in overlapping voices from past, present, and future. We have seen the threads of probability. With the heir's awakening, new possibilities emerge. Futures that were impossible before now become achievable. Daehyun felt the assembly's mood shifting from skepticism to cautious hope, but he knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. The Devourers have one critical weakness, he announced, drawing every consciousness in the hall to full attention. They exist in quantum isolation. They can only consume what already exists because they cannot adapt or create anything new. The probability engineers, beings who specialized in manipulating chance itself, calculated the implications of this statement at impossible speeds. Adaptation requires connection between separate systems. Creation emerges from synthesis of existing elements. If the enemy cannot perform these functions, then we create things they cannot consume. Daehyun finished. Life forms that exist in states of constant change. Technologies that evolve faster than they can be destroyed. Entire new forms of reality that grow stronger when attacked. The assembly erupted in excitement as ancient minds grasped the revolutionary nature of what Daehyun was proposing. Instead of fighting the Devourers with conventional weapons, they would overwhelm them with accelerated evolution and infinite creativity. But Elder Hyunwoo raised a critical concern. Such a strategy would require unprecedented cooperation between incompatible species. The level of integration necessary has never been attempted, which is why I need your help, Daehyun said simply. The royal bloodline can serve as a bridge between different forms of consciousness, but I cannot carry an entire galaxy alone. I need teachers, partners, allies who can help me understand and work with all the incredible diversity of life that exists among us. The Hive Queens, Collective intelligences made up of billions of individual organisms, buzzed with rapid discussion before responding. The proposal requires the heir to adapt beyond any previous biological limits, to integrate aspects of every major consciousness type in the galaxy. The risks of mental fragmentation approach certainty. Maybe, Daehyun acknowledged, but the alternative is extinction for everyone. And humans have always been good at doing impossible things. The Dreamwalkers, beings who existed primarily in the realm of imagination and possibility, painted visions of what such integration might achieve. The assembled consciousnesses saw glimpses of a united galaxy where the boundaries between different forms of life became fluid and cooperative. The ancient treaties provide for such cooperation in times of extreme crisis, the Metal Singers announced, their voices ringing like perfect musical notes. If the heir truly seeks partnership rather than dominion, we will honor the old agreements. One by one, the ancient powers began to pledge their support. The Star Shepherds offered their knowledge of controlling stellar phenomena. The quantum architects promised their mastery of reality manipulation. The emotion farmers contributed their understanding of consciousness and feeling, but it was the youngest species present that made the most surprising offer. The Human Colonial Alliance wishes to contribute, announced Admiral Park, who had arrived with a small fleet of human ships. We may be the newest species here, but we bring something unique. We bring the knowledge of how to survive without special powers, how to adapt with just determination and creativity. The Assembly considered this contribution with surprising seriousness. The ancient beings had grown so powerful over the eons that they had forgotten what it was like to achieve things through pure effort and ingenuity. Accepted, Daehyun said formally. Every perspective will be needed. Every form of strength and wisdom must be brought to bear. As the formal agreements were signed using methods ranging from crystalline resonance to quantum entanglement, Daehyun felt the weight of what he had committed to accomplish. When do we begin the integration process? Elder Jinwoo asked. Immediately, Daehyun replied, his enhanced senses detecting the approaching edge of the Devourer fleet. Time is running out faster than we thought. The enemy will be here in weeks, not months. The assembly began to disperse as each species returned to prepare for the unprecedented cooperation that would follow. Ancient enemies would have to work as allies. Incompatible forms of life would need to find common ground. As the great hall emptied, Junho approached his transformed friend. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. What you're planning to do, it will change you completely. You might not be you anymore when it's finished. Daehyun looked out at the stars through the station's massive viewports, his enhanced vision already detecting the reality distortions that marked the Devourer advance. I stopped being just me the moment I accepted this responsibility, he replied. Now I have to become whatever the galaxy needs me to be. The greatest transformation in galactic history was about to begin, and the fate of countless civilizations rested on the success of one young human who had chosen to become something that had never existed before. The transformation chamber existed in a place that was not quite real. Built using technologies from 17 different civilizations, it floated in folded space where the normal rules of physics bent to allow impossible things to happen. Daehyun stood in the center of the crystalline room, preparing for the most dangerous change any being had ever attempted. Dr. Boram monitored the readings from her control station, her instruments showing energy levels that should have torn apart the fabric of space itself. Your body is already changing in preparation, she reported, her voice tight with worry. I've never seen cellular adaptation happen this quickly. The royal bloodline remembers how to do this, Daehyun explained, his golden eyes now showing flecks of silver that moved like liquid metal. Even after 10,000 years, the genetic memory is still there. Elder Taemin's massive presence filled one side of the chamber as the first phase of integration began. We start with the Draconic template because it provides the stability needed for everything else. Are you ready? Daehyun nodded, trying to stay calm as the ancient dragon began the process that would fundamentally change what he was. The connection formed slowly at first, like two streams of water finding each other. Then suddenly, Elder Taemin's consciousness flooded into him. The experience was overwhelming. Daehyun felt his awareness expanding beyond anything he had imagined possible. Through the dragon's mind, he could perceive reality as patterns of energy and possibility instead of solid matter and empty space. Time became something he could see and touch rather than just experience. His physical body began to change as well. His bones became denser but more flexible. New neural pathways formed in his brain to handle the expanded consciousness. When the integration stabilized, Dae-hyun looked mostly human but felt completely different inside. Phase 1 complete, Bo-ram announced, though her readings made no sense according to any biology she knew. Somehow his body is not just surviving this, it's getting stronger. The energy shapers approached next, their representative flowing into the chamber as pure light that spoke directly to Dae-hyun's enhanced perception. This integration proved even more challenging than the first, as his consciousness temporarily scattered across multiple dimensions. For terrifying moments, Dae-hyun felt himself dissolving into pure energy. His human thoughts and memories became weak echoes in a vast ocean of light and possibility. Only the anchor of the Draconic integration kept him from losing himself completely. Remember who you are. Elder Sora's voice reached him across the dimensional barriers. You are Dae-hyun from Earth. You survived when everyone else died. You chose to help instead of hide. Hold on to these truths. When his consciousness reformed, Dae-hyun discovered he could now see and interact with energy patterns directly. The walls of the chamber became transparent to his new vision, revealing the incredible complexity of forces that held everything together. Integration successful, the energy shaper representative confirmed, its light voice carrying surprise. Biological template shows unprecedented adaptability to non-physical existence states. The machine collective's integration came next, and it proved surprisingly smooth. Their logical processes merged easily with his enhanced neural structure, giving him computational abilities that allowed him to process vast amounts of information simultaneously. Processing efficiency increased by 347%, the mechanical voice announced with satisfaction. Biological consciousness demonstrates optimal compatibility with digital enhancement protocols. One by one, each ancient civilization contributed their unique gifts to Dae-hyun's transformation. The Void Dancers taught him to exist partially outside normal space and time, making him effectively immune to most forms of attack. The crystalline minds shared their ability to think in perfect mathematical harmonies. The Time Weavers granted him perception across multiple moments at once, allowing him to see possible futures and past events with equal clarity. The Deep Dwellers contributed their understanding of gravitational forces, giving him the ability to sense and influence the basic forces that held matter together. With each integration, Dr. Bo-ram's readings became more impossible. He should be dead, she muttered to herself. No consciousness should be able to handle this much change. But instead of breaking apart, he's becoming more stable. Elder Hyunwoo consulted the ancient prophecies with growing amazement. The text spoke of the final heir, one who would unite not just species but the fundamental forces of existence. We thought it was just poetry. The Dreamwalker's integration brought the ability to perceive and influence the realm of imagination and possibility. The Star Shepherds shared their knowledge of stellar manipulation. The quantum architects granted mastery over the basic building blocks of reality. By the time the 17th and final integration was complete, Dae-hyun had become something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. He still looked human, but now served as a living bridge between every major form of consciousness that had evolved in their galaxy. How do you feel? Junho asked when his transformed friend finally opened eyes that now held depths like looking into space itself. Like myself, Dae-hyun replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. But also like everyone I've ever met and everyone I could ever become. The transformation had taken 17 days. During that time, long-range sensors had detected the first of our advanced scouts entering their galaxy. 3 star systems had already vanished completely, consumed by the approaching enemy fleet. The testing period is over, Elder Taemin announced grimly. The enemy has arrived ahead of schedule. Dae-hyun stood up, and as he did, reality seemed to shift slightly around him. His presence now carried weight in dimensions beyond the physical, marking him as something that existed on multiple levels at once. Then let's show them what adaptation really means, he said, his words rippling through quantum fields to reach every allied consciousness in the galaxy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships that had been hidden for millennia began emerging from their sanctuary worlds. Ancient weapons that had slept in the depths of space awakened to new purpose. Beings of incredible power who had withdrawn from galactic affairs started preparing for the greatest battle in cosmic history. But this would not be a normal war fought with ships and weapons. The Devourers had proven immune to such attacks in other galaxies. Instead, this would be a conflict of existence itself, where adaptation would face entropy and creativity would battle destruction. Dae-hyun extended his transformed senses toward the approaching enemy, feeling for the first time the horrible emptiness that marked their presence. Where the Devourers passed, space itself became less real. Possibilities collapsed into nothingness. The very concept of potential ceased to exist. "I can sense them clearly now," he reported to the assembled consciousness of the Alliance. "They're worse than we imagined. They don't just destroy things, they make it impossible for those things to have ever existed." Even as he spoke, his enhanced consciousness began analyzing the enemy's nature, with capabilities no single species could have achieved. The royal bloodline's gift for synthesis was working at levels beyond normal thought, preparing strategies that had never been attempted. "There's something else," he added, his expression growing serious. "They're not acting randomly. There's an intelligence directing their advance, something ancient and filled with purpose. Something is guiding them specifically toward our galaxy." The revelation sent waves of concern through the Allied forces. If the Devourers were being deliberately controlled, their arrival was not chance but a planned assault by something that understood their defenses. "It doesn't matter," Elder Sora declared, her presence blazing with determination. "Whatever is directing them will learn that this galaxy is no longer defenseless. We have our air, our unity, and the combined strength of 50 different paths of evolution." Dae-hyun nodded, feeling destiny settling around him like familiar clothing. The lost boy from the mining colony was completely gone now, replaced by something that represented the hopes and dreams of an entire galaxy. "Signal all allied forces," he commanded, his words carrying across quantum communication networks to reach every ship and station in their defensive line. "The Devourers think they're facing the same scattered civilizations they've defeated before. Time to show them how wrong they are." As the Allied fleet prepared for battle, Dae-hyun began the final phase of his transformation. He was no longer just a bridge between different species. He had become something entirely new, a being capable of growth and adaptation on a scale the universe had never seen. The war for existence itself was about to begin. The Battle of the Outer Spiral began when reality itself started to break down. Dae-hyun stood in the command center of the Allied flagship, his transformed consciousness connecting with thousands of different command structures across the vast defensive fleet. Through his enhanced awareness, he could feel every ship, every crew member, every hope and fear of the beings who had chosen to stand against the darkness. "Enemy contact in 5 minutes," announced Admiral Min-ho, the fleet commander whose human ships had been integrated into the larger Alliance force. "Sir, what we're seeing doesn't match anything in our tactical databases." The main display showed structures that hurt to look at directly. The Devourer ships existed in a state of aggressive unreality, their hulls seeming to eat the light that touched them. Where they moved through space, the very fabric of existence became thin and fragile, as if reality was being slowly erased. "I can see their true nature," Dae-hyun said, his enhanced vision piercing through the dimensional barriers that hid what the Devourers really were. "They're not ships in any way we understand. They're concentrated entropy given form and purpose, manifestations of universal decay that have learned to think and plan." Through his connection to the Void Dancers, he could perceive the spaces between dimensions where the Devourers spawned. What he saw there was beyond description, vast intelligence that fed on the collapse of possibility itself, growing stronger as order turned to chaos. "Begin Phase 1 of the defense plan." Elder Taemin's voice reached every ship in the fleet through quantum communication networks. "All vessels activate reality stabilization fields." The Allied fleet implemented strategies that had been developed during Dae-hyun's transformation. Instead of conventional weapons, their ships deployed reality anchors, devices that locked the local fabric of spacetime into rigid patterns that resisted entropy-based attacks. The first Devourer scouts hit this prepared defense and recoiled as if they had struck a physical wall. For beings that existed by consuming possibility, the suddenly ordered and stable space around the Allied fleet was like touching concentrated pain. "It's working," reported Science Officer Young-soo, his excitement barely contained. "They can't simply unmake our ships because we've frozen the local reality into stable configurations." But Dae-hyun's enhanced senses, detected something troubling in the enemy response. The Devourers weren't retreating or trying different tactics. Instead, they were adapting to the new conditions with frightening speed. They're learning, he warned the fleet. The Devourers aren't mindless forces. There's real intelligence behind their actions. And it's figuring out how to counter our defenses. The second wave of attacks came as reality viruses, patterns of aggressive entropy that tried to spread through the fleet's communication networks and corrupt their reality anchors from within. This was where Daehyun's unique nature proved crucial. His consciousness, existing simultaneously across multiple forms of awareness, could detect and isolate the viral patterns before they could take hold. Through the quantum networks, he reached into infected systems and used his royal bloodline synthesis abilities to transform the entropy viruses into harmless data. Incredible, breathed Liaison Officer Yunji from the crystalline mines. He's not just stopping their attacks, he's converting them into useful information about their weaknesses and methods. The main Devourer force arrived like a tide of weaponized nothingness, their massive forms blocking out entire sections of space. But instead of the easy victory they had achieved in other galaxies, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Daehyun's consciousness expanded across the entire Allied fleet, coordinating not just tactics but the fundamental nature of reality itself in their local space. Through his integrated abilities, he began implementing strategies that defied everything previously known about space combat. Phase 2 begins now, he announced, his words carrying harmonics that resonated across dimensional boundaries. All ships initiate adaptive evolution protocols. What followed challenged every understanding of what was possible in warfare. The Allied ships began to literally evolve in real time, their configurations and systems changing to counter each new Devourer tactic as it appeared. The crystalline vessels grew fractal extensions that turned entropy attacks into harmless mathematical patterns. The Draconic ships began shifting between dimensions to avoid attacks while striking from unexpected angles. Human ships, enhanced by royal bloodline technology, started adapting their crew's biology to survive in the increasingly chaotic battle space. But the most dramatic changes came as Daehyun began directly interfacing with the Devourer attacks themselves. Using abilities that combined aspects of every consciousness he had integrated, he reached out to touch the entropy fields and began transforming them. What is he doing? Admiral Minho asked in amazement as sensors showed space itself changing around Daehyun's influence. He's reversing entropy, Elder Hyunwoo explained, his voice filled with awe. The royal bloodline is literally converting the Devourer's weapons back into creative potential, turning their own power against them. Where Daehyun's influence spread, impossible things began happening. Regions of dead space suddenly bloomed with new forms of life that had never existed before. Entropy fields collapsed into swirling galaxies of pure possibility. The Devourer's weapons began generating creation instead of destruction. The enemy response was immediate and terrifying. The intelligence directing the Devourer assault recognized the unprecedented threat that Daehyun represented and began focusing its full attention on eliminating him. Massive energy surge detected, Young-soo reported as his instruments registered readings that broke their measurement scales. Something enormous is coming through the dimensional barrier. What emerged from the space between realities was the Devourer Prime, the source intelligence that had been guiding their assault across multiple galaxies. Its form was absence given shape, a presence so aggressively empty that looking at it directly caused temporary blindness and existential dread. So, its voice reached them through methods that bypassed all known communication, speaking directly into their consciousness with words that tasted of cosmic despair. The scattered bloodline has found its way home at last. How delightfully pointless. Daehyun felt the full weight of the Prime's attention settling on him like a blanket of crystallized hopelessness. Through his enhanced senses, he could perceive the true scope of its nature, an intelligence older than star clusters that had devoted itself to the systematic elimination of all complexity from the universe. You're not just entropy, he realized, his voice carrying new understanding that rippled through the quantum networks. You're trying to prevent universal heat death by eliminating everything that creates new disorder. You think you're saving the universe by destroying it? Finally, comprehension, the Prime acknowledged, its words causing nearby stars to flicker between existence and void. Your species' gift for adaptation and growth is a disease that spreads chaos wherever it takes root. We are the cure that brings eternal peace. The battle that followed existed on levels beyond physical reality. Daehyun's consciousness, enhanced by integration with 17 different forms of awareness, clashed directly with the Prime's ancient intelligence across dimensions of pure concept and possibility. Where they fought, reality became fluid and changeable. Entire sections of space shifted between different versions of physical law. The Allied fleet found themselves fighting in environments where time moved in spirals, where gravity flowed like water, where the very concept of matter became negotiable. Through it all, Daehyun held to his core identity, using his human memories and friendships as anchors while wielding powers that could reshape existence itself. The royal bloodline's gift for synthesis proved stronger than the Prime's entropic influence, creating new forms of order from the chaos of their battle. But victory would require more than individual power. It would require the ultimate expression of everything the galaxy's diverse civilizations had learned about cooperation, growth, and the infinite beauty of life in all its countless forms. The fate of existence itself hung in the balance as two fundamentally different views of reality clashed in the space between worlds. The final battle between creation and destruction reached its peak in the void between galaxies, where the fabric of reality had become so damaged by their conflict that new forms of physics were being born spontaneously. Daehyun, his consciousness expanded beyond anything previously imagined. Face the Devourer Prime in a realm where thought and matter were the same thing. You cannot win, the Prime declared, its voice causing entire star systems to waver between existence and nothingness. Entropy is the natural end of all things. Every pattern, every life, every dream will eventually return to the silence from which it came. But Daehyun had learned something during his transformation that the ancient entity had never understood. Through his integration with 17 different forms of consciousness, he had gained an insight that transcended any single way of thinking about existence. "You're wrong," he replied, his words creating ripples of new possibility in the broken space around them. Entropy isn't the enemy of order. It's the source of creativity. Without chaos, there can be no growth. Without uncertainty, there can be no innovation. As he spoke, Daehyun began to demonstrate the truth of his revelation, using abilities that combined every gift he had received. He reached out to the entropy field surrounding the Prime and began showing them their hidden potential. The results were beyond anything either side had expected. The entropy didn't resist his touch. Instead, it responded eagerly, revealing its true nature as raw, creative energy that had been locked into destructive patterns by the Prime's limited understanding. Impossible. The Prime recoiled as its own weapon began turning against it. Entropy cannot create. It can only destroy and consume. That's where you're wrong, Daehyun said, his consciousness now touching every part of the battle space at once. Entropy is possibility itself. It's the force that allows new patterns to emerge from old ones. You've been trying to control it, but creativity can't be controlled. Through the quantum communication networks, he reached out to every mind in the Allied fleet, sharing his realization with them. The response was immediate and overwhelming as thousands of different species began to understand what he was showing them. He's right. Elder Taemin's voice resonated with wonder across the fleet. We've been thinking of this as a war between order and chaos, but that's not how the universe actually works. True stability emerges from managed change, from entropy that's guided rather than suppressed. The Allied fleet began implementing new strategies based on this understanding. Instead of fighting the Devourer forces, they began offering them alternatives. Entropy fields were guided into creative rather than destructive patterns. The Devourers themselves were shown new ways to fulfill their nature, without destroying existing life. Many of the lesser Devourers proved surprisingly receptive to these alternatives. Given the choice between endless consumption and creative transformation, they chose growth over destruction, cooperation over isolation. But the Prime itself proved more resistant to change. Eons of viewing itself as the universe's necessary guardian had crystallized its thinking into patterns that fought against new possibilities. "You offer corruption," it declared, lashing out with waves of aggressive emptiness. "The universe was perfect before consciousness arose to complicate it. We seek only to restore that original purity." This was when Junho, watching from the command center of the flagship, made the observation that would change everything. "He's afraid. the young human said quietly, his words carrying across the quantum networks to reach Dae-hyun in the midst of their cosmic battle. Look at his attack patterns. He's not fighting for perfection. He's fighting because he's terrified of change. Dae-hyun's perception shifted as he applied this new understanding to his analysis of the Prime's behavior. What he saw was both heartbreaking and illuminating. The ancient intelligence wasn't malevolent. It was traumatized. "You're not the universe's guardian," he said gently, his voice carrying compassion instead of confrontation. "You're its frightened child, trying to prevent any more pain by stopping all growth and change." For the first time in their battle, the Prime hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Dae-hyun caught glimpses of its true history. It had once been something like him, a consciousness that bridged different forms of existence, but some ancient catastrophe had convinced it that complexity led only to suffering. "The first entropy cascades you witnessed," Dae-hyun continued, using his royal bloodline's gift for synthesis to establish a deeper connection. "They weren't natural disasters. They were the death throes of a universe that had become too rigid, too controlled to sustain life. You tried to prevent that by eliminating complexity, but you caused the very thing you feared." The revelation sent shockwaves through the Prime's consciousness. For millions of years, it had believed its crusade against change was preventing universal death. To learn that it was actually causing such death on a massive scale shattered its fundamental understanding of reality. "Show me," it whispered, its voice carrying undertones of desperate hope instead of cosmic despair. "Show me how entropy can create instead of destroy." What followed was the most complex synthesis in galactic history. Dae-hyun, supported by the combined will and wisdom of every allied consciousness, began demonstrating how the universe actually functioned, not as a battle between order and chaos, but as an eternal dance between stability and change. He showed the Prime how stars were born from the collapse of gas clouds, how life emerged from chemical reactions, how consciousness arose from the interaction of countless simple processes. Each step required entropy to break down old patterns so new ones could form. "Entropy isn't the enemy of life," he explained, as reality reformed around them into demonstration spaces where the Prime could observe these processes directly. It's life's creative partner. Without entropy, the universe would be a static crystal. Without structure, it would be random noise. Life exists in the dynamic balance between them. The Prime's response was gradual but profound. Its rigid patterns began to soften, allowing for the possibility of change and growth. Throughout the galaxy, Devourer forces began transforming as their controller discovered new ways to fulfill its fundamental nature. "Can you teach us?" the Prime asked, its voice now carrying wonder instead of destruction. "Can you show us how to create instead of consume?" "We can learn together," Dae-hyun replied, extending his hand to an entity that could have unmade him with a thought. "That's what synthesis means. That's what the royal bloodline was always meant to accomplish." The transformation that followed reshaped not just the immediate conflict, but the fundamental nature of their entire galaxy. The Devourer forces became partners in creation, using their mastery of entropy to break down barriers between species that had existed for millennia. The ancient enemy became the galaxy's newest ally, bringing knowledge of entropy manipulation that opened up possibilities no one had imagined. Dead worlds began blooming with new life forms. Failed experiments in terraforming were suddenly resolved as entropy was channeled into creative, rather than destructive patterns. Most importantly, the galaxy learned a new way of thinking about conflict and cooperation. The false choice between order and chaos was replaced by an understanding that both were necessary for healthy existence. Years later, Dae-hyun stood in the gardens of New Kepler, a world created through the synthesis of human terraforming technology and Devourer entropy manipulation. He watched as beings from across the galaxy worked together to create forms of life that had never existed before. Junho joined him, no longer the simple mining colonist he had once been, but a skilled diplomat who specialized in helping radically different forms of consciousness understand each other. "Any regrets?" his oldest friend asked, observing the incredible diversity of life forms that now called their galaxy home. Dae-hyun considered the question seriously. The transformation that had made him heir to an ancient bloodline had also made him something beyond purely human understanding. He existed simultaneously as himself and as a living bridge between countless forms of awareness. "No regrets," he finally answered. watching as former devourer entities played with children from 17 different species in gardens that existed across multiple dimensions. This is what we were always meant to become, not rulers of the galaxy but gardeners helping it grow. The stellar dynasty had returned, not as conquerors, but as cultivators of possibility itself. In the spaces between stars, new forms of life continued to emerge from the eternal dance between order and chaos, stability and change, entropy and creation. The galaxy had learned to grow through synthesis rather than conquest, and the universe itself was richer for the lesson. The lost human boy from a dead mining colony had become something unprecedented, a being who proved that the greatest strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to help others become more than they thought possible.